I was pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard the crack of glass shattering in my living room, and my peaceful Saturday morning in Gilbert, Arizona, turned into something I never could have predicted. My heart jumped as I rushed from the kitchen, nearly dropping my mug on the tile floor. The sound had been sharp and violent, completely out of place in my quiet subdivision. When I rounded the corner into the living room, I saw it immediately. A spiderweb crack spread across my front window, radiating out from a central impact point. On the hardwood floor beneath the window sat a jagged rock about the size of a tennis ball. What the hell? I muttered, setting my coffee down on the side table and moving closer to inspect the damage. The rock had hit hard enough to crack the glass, but hadn't broken through completely. I bent down to pick it up, feeling the weight of it in my palm. This wasn't some pebble kicked up by a lawnmower. Someone had thrown this. I walked to the window and peered outside, scanning my front yard and the street beyond. Nothing seemed out of place. The neighborhood was quiet, just like any other Saturday morning in our subdivision. A few houses down, I could see my neighbor Tom washing his car. Across the street, the Hendersons' sprinklers were running, creating little rainbows in the morning sun. Everything looked completely normal, except for the rock in my hand and the cracked window in front of me. I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures of the damage, then photographed the rock. I had no idea who might have done this or why, but I knew enough to document everything. Living in a homeowners association community had taught me that much over the past 3 years. Everything needed to be documented, photographed, and filed away. The HOA demanded it for the smallest infractions, so I figured the same standard should apply when someone vandalized my property. My son Tyler came thundering down the stairs, his 11-year-old energy filling the space before he even appeared. "Dad, what was that noise?" It sounded like something broke. "Someone threw a rock at our window," I said, gesturing to the damage. "Did you see anyone outside? Were you upstairs when it happened?" Tyler shook his head, his eyes wide as he took in the cracked glass. "No, I was in my room playing on my Switch. That's crazy. Who would do that?" "I have no idea, buddy." I ruffled his hair, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was fuming inside. "But I'm going to find out." I spent the next hour calling around to get quotes on window repair. The estimates ranged from $600 to $800, depending on the size and type of glass. My window was a large picture window, double-paned for energy efficiency, which meant it wasn't going to be cheap to replace. I settled on a local company that could come out Monday morning to take measurements and give me a final quote. Sunday morning, I was up early, drinking coffee on my back patio and trying to enjoy the cooler morning air before the Arizona heat became unbearable. Tyler was still asleep, which gave me some rare quiet time to think. I kept running through possibilities in my mind. Was it just random vandalism, some bored teenager? It seemed unlikely given how quiet our neighborhood usually was. Gilbert wasn't exactly known for youth crime sprees. I was lost in thought when I heard a knock at my front door. I walked through the house and opened it to find my next-door neighbor Sarah standing there with her 8-year-old son Liam. Sarah looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Hey, Jason," she said, giving me an apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you so early, but Liam has something he needs to tell you." I looked down at Liam, who was staring at his shoes with the intensity of a kid who knew he was about to share something important. "What's up, buddy?" Liam glanced at his mom, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I saw who threw the rock at your window yesterday." My pulse quickened. "You did? Who was it?" "It was Mrs. Pennington," Liam said quietly. "From the HOA. I was in our front yard getting my soccer ball when I saw her walk up to your house. She picked up a rock from your landscaping and threw it at your window. Then she walked away really fast." I felt my jaw tighten. "Brenda Pennington. Of course it was Brenda Pennington." Sarah jumped in. I know this sounds crazy, but Liam came and told me right after it happened. I didn't know what to do at first. I mean, it's such a serious accusation and Brenda is the HOA president. But Liam was adamant about what he saw and I believe him. He's never lied to me about anything like this. I crouched down to Liam's eye level. Are you absolutely sure it was Mrs. Pennington? You're positive? Liam nodded emphatically. Yes, sir. I know what she looks like. She's always walking around the neighborhood with her clipboard, writing stuff down. She was wearing her white visor like she always does. That detail convinced me. Brenda Pennington was notorious in our subdivision for her white visor, her clipboard, and her seemingly endless mission to cite every minor HOA violation she could find. I had been on the receiving end of her enforcement efforts more times than I could count. Last month, she had sent me a violation notice because my garbage can was visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that it was barely visible and I had been in the process of moving it back to the side yard. The month before that, she had cited me for having a small oil stain on my driveway. But throwing rocks at my window, that seemed extreme even for Brenda. Thank you for telling me, Liam, I said, standing back up. You did the right thing. And Sarah, I really appreciate you bringing him over. Sarah nodded. I figured you needed to know. What are you going to do? I'm going to file a police report, I said. If she really did this, she needs to face consequences. After Sarah and Liam left, I called the Gilbert Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me an officer would come by within a few hours to take a report. While I waited, I did some digging into my own history with Brenda Pennington and the HOA. I pulled out my file cabinet, which I had started keeping specifically for HOA-related documents. Inside were dozens of violation notices, all signed by Brenda Pennington in her capacity as HOA president. I flipped through them, reading the petty complaints one by one. Grass too long by half an inch. Mailbox needed repainting even though it had been painted 6 months earlier. Holiday decorations left up 2 days past the HOA mandated deadline. It went on and on. But things had escalated recently. 2 weeks ago, I had attended an HOA meeting where Brenda had proposed raising the annual dues by $300. When I questioned the increase and asked for a detailed breakdown of where the money would go, she had become visibly angry. She insisted the budget was none of my business and that homeowners should trust the board to manage funds appropriately. I had pushed back, pointing out that as dues-paying members, we had every right to know how our money was being spent. Other homeowners had agreed with me, and the vote on the increase had been tabled until Brenda could provide proper documentation. She had glared at me across the room like I had personally insulted her family. After the meeting, she had cornered me in the parking lot and told me that homeowners who couldn't respect the board's authority should consider moving to a different neighborhood. I had laughed it off at the time, thinking she was just blowing off steam. But now, with a cracked window and an eyewitness account, I realized Brenda Pennington might actually be unhinged. Officer Martinez arrived around noon, a young cop with a professional demeanor and a tablet for taking notes. I walked him through everything, showed him the damage, and handed over the rock that had been thrown. He photographed everything from multiple angles. "And you have a witness who saw the suspect throw the rock?" Officer Martinez asked, tapping notes into his tablet. "Yes, my neighbor's son. He's 8 years old, but he's very clear about what he saw." He identified Brenda Pennington, who lives about 4 houses down. She's the president of our HOA, and we've had several conflicts recently. Officer Martinez looked up from his tablet. "What kind of conflicts?" I gave him the brief version of my disputes with Brenda, including the recent HOA meeting. He listened carefully, asking occasional clarifying questions. "I'm going to need to speak with the witness and his parents," Officer Martinez said. "Can you give me their contact information?" I texted Sarah to give her a heads up, then provided her address and phone number. Officer Martinez thanked me and said he would be in touch after he completed his investigation. What happens next? I asked. "I'll interview the witness and his mother, then I'll pay a visit to Mrs. Pennington," he explained. "If the evidence supports filing charges, we'll move forward with that." Vandalism is a criminal offense. Given the cost of the damage, this would likely be classified as criminal damage, which is a Class 2 misdemeanor in Arizona if the damage is under $250. If it's more than that but less than $1,000, it's a Class 1 misdemeanor. The window repair estimates I got ranged from $600 to $800, I said. Officer Martinez nodded. Then we're looking at Class 1 misdemeanor territory. That's more serious. I'll include the repair estimates in my report. After Officer Martinez left, I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to process everything. Part of me still couldn't believe that Brenda Pennington, annoying as she was, had actually thrown a rock at my window. It seemed like something a child would do, not a 50-something-year-old woman who prided herself on being a pillar of the community. Tyler came downstairs around 1 o'clock, looking for lunch. I made us both sandwiches while filling him in on what Liam had witnessed. "Mrs. Pennington threw the rock." Tyler's eyes went wide. "That's insane. She's always so worried about rules and stuff." "Isn't that like against the rules?" I had to smile at his logic. "It's definitely against the rules, buddy. It's actually against the law." "Is she going to get arrested?" "I don't know, maybe." "The police are investigating." Tyler munched his sandwich thoughtfully. "She was always kind of mean. Remember when she yelled at me for riding my bike on the sidewalk?" I did remember. Brenda had confronted Tyler one afternoon, telling him that riding bikes on the sidewalk created a hazard for pedestrians and violated HOA rules. Never mind that Tyler was 10 at the time, and the sidewalks were explicitly meant for community use. I had politely but firmly told Brenda that my son had every right to ride his bike on public sidewalks, and she had stomped away muttering about disrespectful homeowners. Monday morning, the window repair company arrived right on schedule. The technician confirmed what I already knew. The window would cost $670 to replace, including labor. I gave them the go-ahead and they said they could have it done by Wednesday. Around 10 o'clock, Officer Martinez called me. "Mr. Reynolds, I wanted to update you on the investigation. I spoke with your neighbor and her son yesterday afternoon. The boy's account was very detailed and consistent. He was able to describe Mrs. Pennington's clothing, the approximate time of the incident, and the sequence of events. His mother confirmed that he told her about it immediately after it happened." "Did you talk to Mrs. Pennington?" "I did. Yesterday evening. She denied throwing the rock initially, but when I told her we had a witness, she became defensive and eventually admitted to it. She claimed it was an accident, that she was just picking up the rock to move it from your lawn to your landscaping rock bed and it slipped from her hand." I snorted. "That's ridiculous. My window is at least 15 feet from the nearest landscaping." I pointed out several inconsistencies in her story, Officer Martinez continued. Eventually, she became quiet and said she wanted to speak with a lawyer before saying anything else. Based on the witness testimony and her inability to provide a credible explanation, I'm moving forward with charges. I've submitted my report to the prosecutor's office. They'll review it and decide whether to file formal charges. How long does that usually take? Could be a few days, could be a couple of weeks. It depends on their caseload. But based on what I've seen, I think they'll file charges. The evidence is pretty solid. I thanked Officer Martinez and hung up, feeling a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. Brenda Pennington had actually admitted to throwing the rock, even if her excuse was completely unbelievable. Wednesday afternoon, the new window was installed. It looked perfect, completely erasing the damage Brenda had caused. I paid the repair company their $670 and got a detailed receipt with a full description of the work performed. The neighborhood gossip mill had been churning since the incident. Sarah had told a few people what Liam witnessed, and word spread quickly. I started getting texts and calls from other homeowners, some offering support, others just fishing for details. A few people shared their own horror stories about Brenda Pennington and her heavy-handed HOA enforcement. Tom from down the street called me Wednesday evening. "Jason, I heard about what happened with Brenda. I just want you to know that a bunch of us have been talking and we're fed up with how she's been running the HOA. If you end up taking her to court or anything, we've got your back." "I appreciate that, Tom. Honestly, I'm just waiting to see what the police do." She admitted to throwing the rock, so hopefully there will be consequences. "She's been out of control for years," Tom said. "Last summer, she tried to fine me $100 because my son left his basketball hoop on our driveway overnight. She said it was a violation of the aesthetic standards. I told her where she could shove her aesthetic standards." I laughed despite myself. "I remember that. Didn't she threaten to put a lien on your house?" "She did, but I called her bluff. Got a lawyer to send her a letter explaining that HOA liens have to follow specific legal procedures, and she can't just throw them around because she's on a power trip." She backed down real quick after that. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. It was becoming clear that Brenda had made enemies throughout the neighborhood. The rock-throwing incident seemed to be the catalyst that was finally uniting people against her leadership. Thursday morning, I received a call from the Maricopa County Attorney's office. The woman on the line introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, a prosecutor assigned to misdemeanor cases. "Mr. Reynolds, I've reviewed the police report regarding the criminal damage to your property. Based on the evidence, we're filing charges against Brenda Pennington for 1 count of criminal damage, Class 1 misdemeanor. She'll be receiving notice to appear in court for an arraignment." "What happens at an arraignment?" "She'll be formally informed of the charges and she'll enter a plea. If she pleads not guilty, we'll set a trial date. If she pleads guilty or no contest, we'll move to sentencing. Given that this is a first offense for Mrs. Pennington and the damage amount, I expect her attorney will try to negotiate a plea deal." "What kind of plea deal?" "Typically, we'd look at probation, fines, and restitution to cover your damages. The court takes property crimes seriously, even misdemeanors. She'll likely have to pay you back for the window repair at minimum." This was moving faster than I had expected. "When will the arraignment be?" "Probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. You'll receive notice and you have the right to be present, though it's not required at this stage. If the case goes to trial, you would definitely need to testify." After I hung up with Jennifer Walsh, I sat back in my office chair and let out a long breath. This was really happening. Brenda Pennington, the self-appointed guardian of our neighborhood's property values and aesthetic standards, was being criminally charged for throwing a rock at my window like a petulant child. The notice from the court arrived the following Tuesday. The arraignment was scheduled for 3 weeks out, on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. I marked it on my calendar and sent a text to Sarah, letting her know that charges had been filed and thanking her again for having Liam come forward. She responded immediately, "Good. Brenda needs to learn that actions have consequences." Liam was scared to tell what he saw at first because he thought Mrs. Pennington might get mad at our family, but I told him that telling the truth is always the right thing to do. Proud of my little guy. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening, and I debated whether to attend. Part of me wanted to avoid the drama, but another part of me felt like I needed to show up and face Brenda directly. In the end, I decided to go. I had every right to be there, and I wasn't going to let her intimidate me into staying away. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood pool. When I arrived at 7 o'clock, the parking lot was more crowded than I had ever seen it for an HOA meeting. Apparently, I wasn't the only one interested in seeing how this would play out. Inside, the meeting room was packed. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 10 or 15 homeowners. Tonight, there had to be at least 40 people crammed into the space. The energy in the room was tense, with clusters of people talking in low voices and casting glances toward the front table where Brenda and the other board members sat. Brenda looked composed, but I could see the strain around her eyes. She was wearing her usual professional outfit, a blazer and slacks, with her signature white visor sitting on the table in front of her. When she saw me enter, her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. I found a seat in the back row next to Tom, who gave me a nod of solidarity. Brenda called the meeting to order, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let's get started. First item is the approval of last meeting's minutes." Before she could continue, a man in the third row stood up. I recognized him as Marcus Chen, who lived on the next street over. "Point of order, Madam President. I think we need to address the elephant in the room." Brenda's expression hardened. "If you're referring to pending legal matters, those are not appropriate topics for an HOA meeting." "I'm referring to the fact that you're facing criminal charges for vandalizing a homeowner's property," Marcus said, his voice steady. "A lot of us are questioning whether you should continue serving as HOA president given these circumstances." The room erupted in conversation, with some people nodding in agreement and others looking uncomfortable. One of the other board members, an older woman named Patricia, held up her hands for quiet. "I think Marcus raises a valid concern," Patricia said, looking at Brenda. "Perhaps it would be appropriate for you to step down temporarily while this legal matter is resolved." Brenda's face flushed red. "I have no intention of stepping down. The allegations against me are false, and I will be vindicated in court. This is clearly a targeted attack meant to undermine my leadership and the work I've done for this community." "The police report says you admitted to throwing the rock," someone called out from the middle of the room. "That's a mischaracterization," Brenda shot back. I explained to the officer that it was an accident. This whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion. I felt myself stand up, my voice coming out louder than I intended. "You threw a rock at my window, Brenda. There was an eyewitness. You caused over $600 in damage to my property. That's not a mischaracterization. That's vandalism, and that's why you're being charged with a crime." The room went silent, everyone turning to look at me. Brenda's face went from red to almost purple. "You have been a thorn in my side since the day you moved into this neighborhood," she hissed. "You question every decision, you challenge every rule, you undermine the board's authority at every turn. You showed up to the last meeting and made me look like a fool in front of everyone with your demands for financial transparency. That's called accountability, Brenda. Something you clearly don't understand." Patricia stood up, positioning herself between Brenda and the rest of the room. "I think we need to take a short recess. Tempers are running high and we need to handle this professionally." But Brenda wasn't done. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You've been trying to turn this community against me. You're the problem here, not me. Everything I've done has been in service to maintaining our property values and our standards. Throwing rocks at people's windows maintains property values." Tom called out and several people laughed. That seemed to break something in Brenda. She grabbed her visor and her papers and stormed toward the door. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked. This meeting is adjourned." "You can't just adjourn the meeting because you're upset," Patricia said, but Brenda was already gone, the door slamming behind her. The room dissolved into chaos, with everyone talking at once. Patricia eventually managed to restore some order, and we ended up having an impromptu discussion about HOA governance and the process for removing a board member. It turned out that according to our HOA bylaws, the board could vote to remove an officer with a 2/3 majority, or homeowners could petition for a special election with signatures from 25% of the households. By the end of the evening, Marcus had volunteered to organize the petition effort, and Patricia had agreed to call an emergency board meeting to discuss Brenda's status. I left feeling like maybe something productive had come out of the drama. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. The petition to remove Brenda as HOA president gained signatures quickly, reaching the required threshold within 5 days. Meanwhile, the other board members held their emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Brenda from her position as president. Patricia was appointed interim president until a formal election could be held. Brenda sent a scathing email to the entire neighborhood, claiming she had been the victim of a conspiracy and that she was resigning from the board entirely rather than continuing to serve in an environment of such hostility and disrespect. The email went on for several paragraphs, detailing all the sacrifices she had made for the community and how unappreciated her efforts had been. Most people I talked to just rolled their eyes and deleted it. The arraignment arrived on a humid Thursday morning. I took the morning off work and drove to the Maricopa County Justice Court in downtown Gilbert. The building was busy, with people streaming in and out for various court appearances. I found the right courtroom and took a seat in the gallery. Jennifer Walsh, the prosecutor, spotted me and came over to introduce herself in person. She was a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mr. Reynolds, thanks for coming. You didn't have to be here, but I'm glad you are," I spoke with Mrs. Pennington's attorney yesterday. "She's planning to plead no contest." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means she's not admitting guilt, but she's not contesting the charges either." Legally, it's treated the same as a guilty plea for sentencing purposes. Her attorney is hoping for a lenient sentence given that this is her first offense. Will I get reimbursed for the window? That's what we're pushing for. Restitution is typically part of the sentence in property damage cases. I have your receipt for the $670. We'll present that to the judge. A few minutes later, Brenda arrived with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Brenda looked smaller somehow, less imposing than she usually did. She was wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, clearly trying to present a sympathetic image to the court. When she saw me sitting in the gallery, she quickly looked away. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and the judge entered. He was an older man with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. The arraignment itself was quick and procedural. Brenda stood before the judge with her attorney and the charges were read aloud. "Mrs. Pennington, how do you plead to the charge of criminal damage, a Class 1 misdemeanor?" Her attorney spoke. "No contest, Your Honor." The judge made a note on his paperwork. "Very well, a plea of no contest is entered. We'll proceed to sentencing. Miss Walsh, what is the state's position?" Jennifer Walsh stood. "Your Honor, the state requests that Mrs. Pennington be ordered to pay full restitution to the victim in the amount of $670 for the repair of the damaged window. We also request probation and community service hours." While this is Mrs. Pennington's first criminal offense, the deliberate nature of the vandalism and the fact that she initially lied to police about her actions demonstrate a concerning lack of respect for the law and her neighbors. Brenda's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets this incident. She has been under significant stress due to her duties as HOA president, and she made a terrible error in judgment. She has already resigned from her position on the HOA board and has suffered significant social and reputational consequences in her community. She is prepared to make full restitution and requests leniency given her lack of criminal history and her remorse. The judge looked at Brenda directly. Mrs. Pennington, would you like to address the court? Brenda stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet. Yes, Your Honor, I am deeply sorry for my actions. I let my emotions get the better of me, and I damaged Mr. Reynolds' property. I know there's no excuse for what I did. I'm prepared to make this right in whatever way the court deems appropriate. The judge was silent for a moment, reviewing the paperwork in front of him. Then he looked up. Mrs. Pennington, I'm troubled by the facts of this case. You threw a rock at your neighbor's window in broad daylight, causing significant damage. When questioned by police, you lied about how it happened. These are not the actions of someone who simply made an error in judgment. These are the actions of someone who deliberately chose to vandalize another person's property and then tried to cover it up. Brenda's shoulders sagged. However, the judge continued, I do take into account that this is your first offense and that you have taken responsibility by entering a plea. Therefore, I'm sentencing you to 1 year of supervised probation, 60 hours of community service to be completed within 6 months, and full restitution to the victim in the amount of $670. The restitution must be paid within 30 days. If you violate the terms of your probation or fail to complete your community service, you will face jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Brenda said quietly. The judge banged his gavel. The court will take a 10-minute recess before the next case. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Jennifer Walsh came over to me. The restitution order means she has to pay you the $670 within 30 days. If she doesn't, let me know and we can take action to enforce the judgment. Thank you for handling this, she smiled. That's my job. I'm glad we could get a resolution that holds her accountable. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Arizona sunshine, feeling like a weight had been lifted. Justice had been served, at least in the legal sense. Brenda Pennington had been held accountable for her actions. I didn't see Brenda in the parking lot, which was probably for the best. I imagined she and her attorney were having a conversation about next steps, community service options, and how to pay the restitution. When I got home, Tyler was just getting back from school. I told him about the court hearing and the judge's sentence. So she has to pay you for the window and do community service? Tyler asked. Yep. And she's on probation for a year, which means if she gets in any more trouble, she could go to jail. Tyler grinned. Good, maybe she'll think twice before she throws rocks at anyone else's house. That evening, I got a phone call from Patricia, the new interim HOA president. Jason, I wanted to let you know that the board met this afternoon, and we've decided to do a complete audit of the HOA finances. Some things aren't adding up in the records Brenda kept, and we want to make sure everything is in order. That's probably a good idea, I said. Let me know if you find anything concerning. I will. And I also wanted to apologize on behalf of the board for how things were handled under Brenda's leadership. A lot of those violation notices you received were petty and unwarranted. We're going to be implementing new guidelines for how violations are assessed and communicated. The board should be serving the community, not antagonizing homeowners over minor issues. I really appreciate that, Patricia. Thank you. Exactly 28 days after the sentencing, I received a certified check in the mail for $670, along with a brief note on plain stationery. Mr. Reynolds, please accept this restitution payment as ordered by the court. Brenda Pennington. No apology, no expression of remorse beyond what she had been forced to say in court. Just the bare minimum required by law. I deposited the check the same day, officially closing the financial chapter of this saga. Over the following weeks and months, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though the dynamics had shifted. Brenda kept to herself, rarely venturing out except for necessities. When I did see her, usually getting her mail or driving past, she refused to make eye contact. I heard through the grapevine that she had been assigned to complete her community service hours at a local food bank, sorting donations and helping with distribution days. Patricia proved to be a much more reasonable HOA president. The board's audit revealed that Brenda had been appropriating HOA funds for personal use, small amounts here and there that added up to several $1,000s over 2 years. The board decided to handle it civilly rather than criminally, requiring Brenda to repay the money in installments. She complied, likely wanting to avoid any further legal trouble while on probation. The new HOA board implemented policies that required transparency in finances, set clear standards for what constituted a legitimate violation, and established an appeals process for homeowners who felt they had been unfairly cited. It was everything I had been advocating for, and it made the community a better place to live. Tom and I became good friends after everything that happened, often getting together for weekend barbecues. Sarah and her family remained wonderful neighbors, and I made sure Liam knew how much I appreciated his courage in coming forward with what he had witnessed. The kid had integrity, and that's something that should be recognized and encouraged. Tyler went back to riding his bike on the sidewalks without anyone harassing him. I put my garbage can wherever was convenient without worrying about violation notices. Life in the neighborhood became what it should have always been, a community of people looking out for each other rather than looking for reasons to complain. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after the court case, I was out front watering my lawn when a moving truck pulled up to Brenda's house. I watched as movers began carrying furniture and boxes out to the truck. A few hours later, Brenda emerged, supervising the loading. She looked older somehow, worn down by everything that had happened. Part of me felt bad for her. She had imploded her life over a petty grudge and an inability to control her temper. But another part of me remembered the crack of the rock hitting my window, the hundreds of dollars in damage, and the malicious intent behind the act. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As the moving truck pulled away late that afternoon, I realized I didn't even know where Brenda was moving to. It didn't matter, really. She was someone else's neighbor now, hopefully having learned something from this experience, though I had my doubts. That evening, Tyler and I grilled burgers in the backyard. The sun was setting, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I flipped the burgers and took a sip of my beer, feeling content. "Dad," Tyler said, looking up from his phone, "my friend at school was asking about the crazy HOA lady who threw the rock at our house. Can I tell him the story?" I smiled. "Sure, buddy. Just stick to the facts. Sometimes the truth is interesting enough without any embellishment." "Did you ever think something like this would happen when we moved here?" I considered the question. No, I definitely didn't. When we moved to this neighborhood, I thought the biggest challenge would be keeping up with lawn maintenance and paying the HOA dues on time. I never imagined I'd end up in court over a rock through my window. Are you glad it all happened? I thought about that too. I'm not glad the window got broken or that we had to go through all the stress and drama. But I am glad that Brenda was held accountable and that the HOA changed for the better. Sometimes it takes a crisis to make people realize that things need to change. Tyler nodded thoughtfully, processing this bit of wisdom. Then he grinned. "Plus, it's a pretty cool story," I laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is." The burgers finished cooking and we ate dinner on the patio, talking about school and sports and weekend plans. Normal stuff. Good stuff. The kind of peaceful evening that I had wanted all along. In the weeks and months that followed, the neighborhood continued to thrive under Patricia's steady leadership. The contentious atmosphere that had existed under Brenda's rule dissipated, replaced by a genuine sense of community. People waved to each other again, stopped to chat on evening walks, and organized social events without worrying about violating some obscure HOA regulation. I stayed involved with the HOA, attending meetings regularly and even joining the architectural review committee. It felt important to be part of the solution, to help build the kind of community where people wanted to live rather than felt trapped by petty rules and vindictive enforcement. The window that replaced the one Brenda broke remained perfect, unmarked by any damage. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of the importance of standing up for what's right, documenting everything and trusting that the legal system, while imperfect, could deliver justice when presented with clear evidence. Liam, the kid who witnessed the rock throwing, became something of a neighborhood hero. His parents were proud of him for speaking up, and other kids looked up to him for having the courage to tell the truth even when it was difficult. Sarah told me he had even done a presentation at school about civic responsibility and the importance of being a good witness. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons through the whole ordeal. I learned that living in an HOA community requires vigilance and active participation. I learned that petty tyrants exist in all walks of life, from corporate boardrooms to neighborhood associations, and that standing up to them often requires patience, documentation, and a willingness to see things through to the end. I learned that most people are reasonable, and that a vocal minority enforcing unreasonable standards can be changed when others find the courage to speak up. I also learned that my instinct to document everything, annoying as it sometimes felt, had been absolutely correct. Those photographs of the damage, the repair receipts, and my records of past conflicts with Brenda had all been crucial in building the case against her. In HOA disputes, as in many legal matters, documentation is everything. One afternoon, about a year after the incident, I was trimming the bushes in my front yard when a young couple walked by with a real estate agent. They were clearly looking at houses in the neighborhood, checking out the area. The woman stopped and called out to me, "Excuse me, do you live here? Can I ask you about the neighborhood?" I set down my hedge trimmers and walked over. "Sure, I've lived here about 4 years now." "How's the HOA?" the man asked. "We've heard mixed things about homeowner associations." I smiled. "It's actually really good. It went through some changes about a year ago, and now it's run by people who actually care about the community rather than just enforcing rules. The board is transparent, the fees are reasonable, and they focus on things that actually matter, like maintaining common areas and organizing community events." The woman looked relieved. "That's great to hear. We were worried after some of the horror stories we've read online. Every HOA is different," I said. "The key is getting involved and making sure reasonable people are making the decisions. This neighborhood learned that lesson the hard way, but we're better for it now." They thanked me and continued their tour. I watched them go, hoping they would decide to buy in the neighborhood. Good people made good communities, and the more good people we had, the better things would be. As I went back to trimming my bushes, I reflected on how much had changed since that Saturday morning when I heard glass shattering. The sound had been startling and violent, disrupting my peaceful weekend. But in a strange way, it had been a catalyst for positive change, not just for me but for the entire community. Brenda Pennington had thrown a rock at my window out of spite and anger, thinking she could intimidate me into silence or submission. Instead, she had united the neighborhood against her tyranny, exposed her financial mismanagement, and ended her own reign as HOA president. She had paid $670 in restitution, completed 60 hours of community service, and ultimately moved away in disgrace. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had flourished. Property values had actually increased under Patricia's leadership. not because of strict aesthetic enforcement, but because people wanted to live in a community that felt welcoming and reasonable. Homes that came on the market sold quickly, with buyers attracted by the balance of maintained standards and sensible governance. Tyler flourished too. Now 12 years old and in 7th grade, he had become more confident and outspoken. He had learned from watching me stand up to Brenda that it was important to advocate for yourself and do the right thing even when it was difficult. Those were lessons that would serve him well throughout his life. As for the legal case, I had kept all the documentation in a file labeled Pennington v. Reality. It was a small joke for myself, a reminder that even when people try to create their own version of reality where they are always right and everyone else is wrong, the actual facts have a way of prevailing. Brenda had tried to deny what she did, had tried to claim it was an accident, but the evidence didn't support her story. Reality won, as it usually does when people take the time to document the truth. I finished trimming the bushes and stood back to admire my work. The landscaping looked neat and tidy, meeting HOA standards without requiring obsessive perfection. It was the kind of balance that made sense, the kind of standard that Patricia and the new board promoted. Keep things looking nice, but don't make people's lives miserable over minor imperfections. That evening, I got a text from Marcus Chen inviting Tyler and me to a neighborhood barbecue the following weekend. It was becoming a monthly tradition, with different families taking turns hosting. These gatherings had become one of the best parts of living in the community, bringing people together in a way that Brenda's enforcement regime never had. I replied that we would be there and asked what we could bring. Marcus suggested drinks, so I made a note to pick up some sodas and beer. These simple acts of community building, of neighbors actually being neighborly, were what HOA living should have always been about. The weekend barbecue was a huge success, with at least 20 families showing up. Kids played in the pool while adults stood around grilling and chatting. Someone had set up a volleyball net, and a friendly but competitive game was underway. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, everything a community gathering should be. Patricia was there with her husband, and I took a moment to thank her again for her leadership. "You've done an amazing job turning things around," I told her. "The neighborhood feels completely different than it did a year ago." She smiled warmly. "It's not just me, it's everyone being willing to participate and communicate. That's what makes a community work." Brenda tried to do everything herself and control every detail. I learned from that mistake. My job is to facilitate, not dictate. That's a lesson more HOA boards need to learn. Agreed. I actually got invited to speak at a seminar for HOA board members next month. They want me to talk about best practices for community governance. I'm thinking about calling my presentation "What Not to Do, Learning from HOA Horror Stories." I laughed. That's perfect. Our neighborhood's dysfunction became everyone's education. As the afternoon turned to evening, I found myself sitting by the pool with Tom, Marcus, and a few other neighbors, watching the kids play. We talked about sports, work, family, and neighborhood matters. It was comfortable and easy, the kind of conversation that happens between people who genuinely like and respect each other. At one point, Tom raised his beer in a toast. "To Jason, for having the guts to stand up to Brenda and see it through to the end. You made this neighborhood a better place." Everyone clinked bottles and cans, and I felt genuinely touched by the gesture. I appreciate that, but honestly, it was Liam who made the difference. If he hadn't witnessed what happened and had the courage to come forward, Brenda might have gotten away with it. "True," Sarah said from nearby, "but you had to be willing to pursue it." A lot of people would have just let it go, not wanting the hassle. You insisted on accountability, and that set the tone for everything that came after. As the party wound down and Tyler and I headed home, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. not because I had defeated Brenda Pennington in some personal vendetta, but because a community had come together to create something better. The rock through my window had been the spark, but the real story was about how people responded to that spark. They could have ignored it, could have dismissed it as a personal dispute between two neighbors. Instead, they recognized it as a symptom of a larger problem and took action to fix that problem. They signed petitions, attended meetings, voted for change, and held their leadership accountable. That was the real victory, the one that mattered most. Walking into my house through the front door, I glanced at the living room window, the one that had been replaced after Brenda's attack. It gleamed in the evening light, perfect and whole. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I planned to sleep in, drink coffee on the back patio, and enjoy the peace of knowing I lived in a community that had learned, grown, and ultimately thrived. The rock that Brenda threw had been meant to intimidate and harm. Instead, it had shattered more than just glass. It had shattered the illusion that one person could control an entire community through fear and petty enforcement. It had shattered the silence of homeowners who were fed up but hadn't known how to create change. And ultimately, it had shattered Brenda's own carefully constructed image of herself as the indispensable guardian of neighborhood standards. In its place, something better had grown. A real community, built on mutual respect, reasonable standards, and genuine care for neighbors. The $670 Brenda paid in restitution had repaired my window, but the real repair work had been done by dozens of homeowners who decided they wanted something better. As I locked up the house for the night and headed upstairs, I thought about all the stories I had heard about HOA nightmares. Tyrannical board members, unreasonable rules, neighbors turned enemies over minor violations. Our neighborhood had been heading down that path, accelerating toward dysfunction under Brenda's leadership. But we had turned it around. It hadn't been easy and it hadn't been quick, but we had done it. And now, a year later, we were reaping the benefits of that hard work. Kids played freely, neighbors talked openly, and the HOA served its proper function of maintaining community standards without becoming an oppressive bureaucracy. Tyler called out goodnight from his room, and I responded in kind. Then I stood at my own bedroom window, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows up and down the street. Somewhere, someone was probably watching television. Someone else might be reading a book or helping kids with homework. Normal, everyday life in a community that had survived its crisis and come out stronger. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window and the sound of birds chirping outside. No shattering glass, no unexpected vandalism, just a peaceful Sunday morning. I made coffee, carried it out to the back patio, and sat down to enjoy the quiet. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Jason, wanted to give you a heads up. The board approved funds to replace all the common area lighting with LED fixtures. Should reduce electricity costs by 30% and improve visibility for evening walks. We'll be sending out an announcement this week with the timeline." I texted back my approval. This was how an HOA should function, making decisions that benefited everyone and communicating clearly about what was happening. No surprise violation notices, no petty complaints, just competent management of community resources. As I sipped my coffee and watched butterflies dance around the flowers Sarah had planted along our shared property line, I realized that the story of Brenda Pennington and the thrown rock had become part of the neighborhood's oral history. New residents heard about it, often with dramatic embellishments, and it served as a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA power goes unchecked. But it was also a story about justice, about how standing up for what's right can lead to positive change. It was about the importance of witnesses who tell the truth, about legal systems that work when given proper evidence, and about communities that come together to solve problems. The $670 I received in restitution had long since been spent and forgotten. The real compensation was living in a neighborhood that felt like home, where neighbors looked out for each other and the HOA served rather than ruled. As the morning sun climbed higher and the temperature began to rise, I finished my coffee and headed inside to start the day. There were groceries to buy, chores to do, and later that afternoon, Tyler had a baseball game I wanted to attend. Normal life, the kind of life I had wanted when I moved to this neighborhood in the first place. The window in my living room caught the morning light as I walked through the house, a reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. It was just a window now, nothing more and nothing less. The crack was gone, repaired and replaced, and in many ways the same was true of our community. The damage had been repaired and we had all moved forward, stronger and wiser for the experience. That, in the end, was the real story. Not about revenge or victory, but about growth, accountability, and the power of a community to heal itself when good people decide to get involved. Brenda Pennington had thrown a rock at my window, but she had inadvertently given the neighborhood something far more valuable. A reason to come together and create the kind of community we all deserve to live in. And for that, in a strange and ironic way, I was almost grateful.